Summary of Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston starts the story with an introduction that explains why she wanted to find and talk to Cudjoe Lewis. She says that slavery is the most dramatic chapter in the story of human existence, and that many people have written both for and against it. But almost none of the writers went through slavery themselves. So, she wants to find the last person who lived through the infamous Middle Passage so she can hear his side of the story. Hurston gives some background on the people who bought Cudjoe and brought him to America in 1859, which was many years after the America banned the international slave trade. Jim, Tim, and Burns Meare, three brothers who own a shipyard in Alabama, pay for the trip. They send Captain Bill Foster on the ship Clotilda to the West African kingdom of Dahomey to buy slaves. Foster meets with the Prince of Dahomey when he gets to the Gulf of Guinea. He then chooses 130 slaves from the Barracoon, or stockade. Since Dahomey often goes to war with its neighbors and sells the people it beats as slaves, there are a lot of people to choose from. Foster sneaks into the Mobile Bay on his way back to America in 70 days. The slaves are hidden on a plantation, and Foster burns the boat to hide evidence of his trip. Some of the slaves are sold, but most of them are split up between the brothers. But a year later, the Civil War starts, and when it's over, all of the slaves are set free. They work together to build Africatown, which is now called Plateau. This town is still home to Cudjoe Lewis. When Hurston first goes to see Cudjoe, she finds him eating breakfast on his porch. When she calls him by his African name, Kossola, he likes her right away. She tells him that she wants to hear all of his memories, so he starts to talk about his childhood in West Africa. Even though his family isn't wealthy, he grows up in a big compound where his grandfather's house is surrounded by the houses of his wives and their children. He talks about how marriage works in his village. Usually, a man's first wife chooses his second and third wives and sets up their marriages. Hurston starts going to see Cudjoe more often and brings him gifts like peaches to get along with him. One afternoon, he talks about how his tribe's king punishes people who do wrong. When a man is put on trial, all the men and boys in the village watch. He remembers seeing a man who was going to poison someone be killed in a fancy ceremony where a group of young men danced around him and sang songs before cutting off his head. Another time, a murderer is tied to the body of the person he killed and left in the village square until he dies of exposure. When Cudjoe turns 13, he starts training to be a soldier, and the village men let him sit with them when they talk and make decisions. He can't wait to grow up and is thrilled about the idea of getting married. But in the middle of the night, without warning, the nearby kingdom of Dahomey attacks his village. Cudjoe sees angry soldiers kill old people who can't run away. He and other young and healthy villagers are taken prisoner. The prisoners have been walking toward Dahomey for days. The people who are holding them carry the heads of people they killed during the raid. In Dahomey, Cudjoe and the other villagers spend 3 weeks locked in the Barracoon. Other prisoners are in other Barracoons, but because they all speak different languages, they can't talk to each other. Here, Cudjoe sees his first white people. At the end, a white man comes to the Barracoon and picks 130 people. The next day, those 130 people are taken to the ships. Cudjoe and the others have been stuck in the hold for 13 days with little to eat or drink. When they are finally let out on the deck, they are very weak and can only see water. 70 days pass before they get to Alabama, and this hard time keeps going on. There, the people who were taken from their homes have to sneak through the swamp to the Meare's plantations so that the government doesn't find out. In the end, they are split between the three brothers. Cudjoe is taken to a plantation owned by Captain Jim. The work is hard, and the way they farm is different from what Cudjoe is used to. Cudjoe is glad that Jim Meare takes better care of his slaves than his brothers do by giving them clothes and shoes. Not because of the work, but because they are forced to do it, he and the other newcomers are sad. During the time he is a slave, Cudjoe works on one of Meare's boats that moves lumber up the river. It is hard work to load and unload the boat with lumber. Years after the Civil War starts, U.S. soldiers get to Mobile and tell the slaves working on Mear's boat that they are now free and can go wherever they want. After being freed, all of the Clotilda's villagers get together at one of their plantations to talk about their plans for the future. For a while, they hope to buy tickets on ships to get back to Africa, but they soon find out that this is impossible. Then they decide to build a town where all of them can live. The villagers pick Cudjoe to go to the Mear brother and ask for a piece of land in exchange for all the work they did without getting paid. Tim Mear gets angry, though, when Cudjoe makes this request of him. He says, "I treated my slaves well, so I don't owe them anything." So, the villagers have to save money until they have enough to buy land from the Mears. They choose 2 men to be judges and make their own laws and government. They work together to build houses, and they call the place Africatown. After a while, a black preacher starts coming to the village and eventually converts everyone to Christianity. The villagers then build a church for themselves. Cudjoe still misses having a family. He asks an Abela, or Sealy in America, woman from Africatown to marry him, and she says yes. They moved in together. Cudjoe and Sealy have 6 kids, all of whom have names that are both African and English. But as the kids get older, the black and white communities around them shun them and call them Iginant Savage and make out day kin to Monkey. Cudjoe's boys fight a lot with other kids, and over time they get a bad name for being dangerous. Sealy, Cudjoe's only daughter, dies of a sudden illness when she is a teen. Cudjoe and his wife are very sad about their daughter. After a few years, Cudjoe Jr. gets into a fight with a sheriff's deputy and is shot. Even though Sealy takes care of his wounds for hours, he still dies. Cudjoe is sad that none of his kids have been to Africa. After these 2 bad things happen to him, Cudjoe is hit by a train in Mobile while he is there for business. Even though he gets better, he can no longer do hard work, so the people of Africatown hire him as the church sexton. Cudjoe sues the railroad, but even though the lawyer wins a big settlement, Cudjoe takes the money and runs away to the north. Even worse, Cudjoe's son David is hit by a train in Mobile and dies from his injuries. Polly, Cudjoe's older son, is furious and wants Cudjoe to sue the railroad again, but Cudjoe now thinks that this is pointless. Polly is very unhappy with life in Africatown because his family has to deal with problems and unfair treatment all the time. He runs away one day, and no one ever sees or hears from him again. Cudjoe still has his oldest son, Alec, who is married and has kids, and his youngest son, Jimmy. One day, Jimmy gets a fever out of the blue and dies. He and Sealy are very lonely in their house because they don't have any children. After hearing this sad story, Hurston took a picture of Cudjoe as he stood in the churchyard next to the graves of his children. Sealy wakes up Cudjoe one night and tells him that she's been dreaming about the kids. She dies suddenly the next day, and Cudjoe knows she can't go on without her children. The following month, Alec also dies. Now, Cudjoe's only family members are his son-in-law, whom he married, and his 2 grandchildren. He tells the other people in Africatown that Sealy was like a loan from God, so he can't complain when he has to give her up. Hurston sums up the 2 months she has spent talking to Cudjoe as a way to end the story. Sometimes they eat or work in his garden for the whole afternoon without talking about the past. She thinks they've become close friends. When she finally leaves, he gives her a basket of peaches as a gift. Hurston is sure that Cudjoe doesn't fear death, but that he is full of trembling awe before the altar of the past.
About the author. Zora Neale Hurston was born in Alabama. She grew up in Eatonville, Florida, which was one of the only all-black towns in the country. All of her grandparents were slaves. Her father was a sharecropper and a preacher. Hurston went to a Baptist boarding school when she was a teenager, but when her father suddenly stopped paying for her schooling, she dropped out and joined a traveling theater group. Hurston eventually got her high school diploma. She went on to attend Howard University and got a degree in anthropology from Barnard College, where she was the only black student. Hurston worked with the famous anthropologist Franz Boas at Barnard. She did anthropological research in the American South and the Caribbean, which inspired her fiction writing and led to the Barracoon interviews. Hurston worked as a journalist and had short stories published in magazines for most of her life. She lived in Florida and Harlem, where she became a well-known figure of the Harlem Renaissance. But she often had trouble with money. During one of these times, she was working as a maid and living in a welfare home in Florida when she had a stroke and died. Today, she is best known for her book Their Eyes Are Watching God, which is set in Eatonville, her hometown.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.